Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, we're here today for Matures to Boomers, What Plan Giving Professionals Need to Know. I'm Jen Lennon with the Stelter Company, and as an industry leader in plan giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing innovative solutions and education for your marketing needs. And we're very happy to provide this complimentary webinar today, presented by Stelter's Director of Market Research, Cheryl Sturm, and our VP of Business Development and Marketing, Nathan Stelter. Before I pass it off to our presenters, I just wanted to say a few notes about the series. Today's webinar is the second to last in our series for 2017. We try to do one per month, so we've got today's, and then we'll end our series with Greg Sharkey, who is Senior Philanthropic Advisor for the Nature Conservancy, and he's going to talk about questions to start gift planning conversations. His webinar will be December 12th. And you can go to stelter.com/webinars to register for that. And while you're there, you can access recordings for any of the webinars that we've hosted this year and even beyond. We are in the planning stages for our 2018 webinar curriculum, so if you have any suggestions on topics that you would like to see next year, please let us know in your post-webinar survey. There will be a question about that, and you can just give us some ideas about topics you're interested in. And if you are an expert yourself in topics related to marketing, fundraising, plans giving, and you're interested in presenting for us, please feel free to mention that as well, and I will get in touch to discuss with you. So now back to our presenters today. First, we have Cheryl Sturm, our Director of Market Research. With over 30 years of global communications marketing experience, Cheryl has strong expertise in strategic planning, market research, and results measurement. Prior to joining Stelter, she worked for 10 years in the biotech industry, was responsible for launching new ingredient products in North America, Japan, Korea, and Indonesia. She worked with Young and Rubicon Advertising's Midwest office as the Senior Vice President Account Group Director, building brands for clients such as John Deere Credit, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Lotto America. Cheryl has her BA in secondary education with an emphasis in economics from Westmar University. Next up, we have Nathan Stelter, the Vice President of Business Development and Marketing for the Stelter Company. Nathan's responsibilities include product development, strategic partnerships, marketing consultation, client services, and corporate marketing. His primary concentration is on overseeing our consulting and marketing teams, using his experience to strategize with our consultants and our key accounts to develop distinct marketing solutions to meet each nonprofit's unique plan giving needs. He is also a lecturer at national and regional industry meetings on gift planning marketing trends. You've probably heard him in the past. In fact, Nathan and Cheryl just did this presentation at the National Conference on Philanthropic Planning, that's a mouthful, back in October. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to Nathan to start the presentation.
Terrific. Thank you, Jen, and welcome everyone. Yes, Cheryl and I did just present this in Baltimore at NCPP or CGP or NCPG or whatever we're called nowadays, and it was the first time we were able to present this new data from a recent research study that we received the data points for just this past fall. So why did we decide to talk about the Matures to Boomers, and why did we want to spend some time talking about these audiences in particular with this research study in mind? We all know very well that Matures typically have been the audience that a lot of us spend our time with in regards to plan giving outreach, plan giving cultivation, plan giving stewardship. But just last year, in 2016, the first boomer turned 70. Heck, the first Gen Xer turned 50 a couple years ago. So we are definitely seeing a shift and a change in the audience that we're talking to, and most definitely it's more than just age. It's a variety of different things that have impacted them and their characteristics and the way that they work with us. And I'm not going to assume, but I feel like a good chunk of you on the call have seen some of the stuff Stelter has done over the last decade in research. Nobody in the space has invested more time, energy, resources, and money into this space, including a variety of bequest studies, advisor studies, studies on the industry and the development professionals as a whole. And then the last 3 years, we've been fortunate enough to partner with the Natural Marketing Institute. And I bring that up because that is going to be the research study that we reference Cheryl and I referenced throughout this presentation today. This is typically a study, a healthy aging study that has been going on, a trended study over the last 12 years now. We've been fortunate to be part of it the last 3 years. Really looking at how, as people age, and how does that impact their decision-making around a variety of different things. And part of that does include philanthropy and healthcare and financial situations. So you'll see a variety of statistics shared today and some data points, and then we'll also walk through how are people utilizing that information when it comes to their outreach and their engagement with donors. As you see on your screen in front of you, our agenda is pretty tight and to the point. So we're going to look at some definitions just to make sure we're all on the same page in regards to what the different audiences we're going to talk about today look like, as well as some similarities, and then get into some differences on where you need to be mindful of when it comes to having these conversations. As Jen mentioned, as questions come up, please do share those. We will leave some time at the end of the presentation to address these. So we will move on to look at the generational definitions. As I mentioned earlier, this is more than just age difference. What we're going to look at is really more of a combination of cultural and environmental influences. Maturers, will start with this audience. Really, this is, as many of us on the phone know, is where plan giving has been built, on the back of the silent generation, on the back of this audience. Some of the things to be mindful of in regards to this group is right now, currently, they comprise about 5% of the U.S. adult population. It's critical to understand the generation of which they grew up, where it was trusting charity. It was growing up with big charity and understanding and seeing how they impact the lives of them, their loved ones, and those around them. And so there's definitely a strong trust that we as fundraisers, we as nonprofits will be good stewards of their dollars. And when we typically look at this audience, we're looking at messaging around ease of giving, legacy, leading my legacy. I've impacted charity, charity's impacted me. But definitely from a value standpoint, those folks have stayed with organizations a long time in their career and definitely believe in top-down leadership and hard work and a variety of other things. Largely conservative, fiscally conservative at this stage in their life, respect for authority, formal rules, and definitely a generation that places a high value on education. When we look at their portfolios, typically we see a combination of these items. This is a generation, unlike some of the generations to come, that have pensions, that have Social Security, that have qualified retirement plans. This is really that pre-IRA audience. So when we are looking at ease of giving and tools and solutions for them, it's something to be mindful of. I'll pass it off to Cheryl to talk a little bit about the boomers.
Well, if the maturers were the Cleaver generation, the boomers are certainly the Archie Bunker generation. Now we're talking about those of us that grew up in the 60s and 70s, and it was a very different time than what Nathan just talked about with maturers. The major event, which actually was taking place during the majority of our childhood, was the Vietnam War and the political unrest that was wrapped around that particular period in time. It was also paired with major civil rights movements in the U.S. So there were some peaceful protests. There were protests that weren't so peaceful. Pair that up with the sexual revolution, the Summer of Love in '67, major shifts in music, major shifts in how we looked at authority. It was a time when there was a very common statement out there: never trust anyone over the age of 30. As a generation, boomers were taught to question everything, never trust the status quo. And a lot of that same mindset has translated into how boomers look at a number of things, including financial planning and charitable giving. And finally, from a dress standpoint, where the maturers were much more formal in appearance, this is the time of the maxi dress and love beads and tie-dye and peace symbols. So a very different period of time. From a value standpoint, we also saw a major shift. Boomers tend to be much more optimistic about what was happening during their time period. It was also a major shift in business where women no longer had such a strong glass ceiling, and so we're seeing more teams and more teamwork actually being put in place in the workplace. But the work ethic was very different. While matures, their goals were to work until they were 65, collect Social Security, and enjoy retirement. When it came to boomers, it was much more about climbing that work ladder and assuming all of the personal gratification that came along with that, and that includes success in all its trimmings. So when we're looking at, which generation is most likely to be owning that second lake house or that beach house, or who bought the big boats, or who was really into, expensive brands of automobiles, now we're really talking much more about the boomers than we are about matures. And finally, when Nathan was talking about the retirement portfolio of matures, you see that a couple of things are missing from the slide on matures, and that's pensions and that's Social Security. By the time the boomers were heavily into the workforce, unions in the U.S. had much less influence than they did during the time that the matures were really in their key earning years. The same thing with Social Security. Boomers have much, much less trust that Social Security is going to be placing a large impact on their financial future. And then finally, you'll see this is the time in boomers' heavy workforce when IRAs came into place. IRAs came into existence in 1974, so about midway through boomers' childhood. Well, why the big focus on boomers? Why do we care about them so much? We just told you that matures make up 5% of our U.S. adult population, but boomers make up 39%. But that 39% actually controls 80% of all of the financial wealth in the U.S. They give 50% of all of the individual philanthropic giving, and they're 1/3 more generous than matures were at that same age. And the reason for that is because boomers understood that it takes more in order to make an impact. And we're going to see that actually trickle down to younger generations as well. And from a plan giving perspective, and as plan giving professionals, boomers are going to maintain this wealth inequity for at least the next 18 to 20 years. So it's crucial that in order to keep a vibrant, healthy plan giving program going, that boomers are going to have to be a major focus. Now, we don't want to scare anyone into thinking that you have to do everything differently than what you've done in the past, and that there's absolutely, a clear-cut line between a boomer and a mature and how they always act or how they're always different. There really are a number of key similarities here. And so we're going to start this afternoon actually looking at some of those similarities. So first of all, both generations attach the exact same importance to donating to charity, and they both volunteer with nonprofits at exactly the same rate. If 81% of the population said that they donated money to a charity between August of 2016 and August of 2017, 90% of matures and boomers also said that they donated money in that same time period. Now, I don't want to overemphasize this, because when we say that they gave money, that honestly could be anything from putting a quarter into a Salvation Army kettle to, making a donation of a multi-million-dollar gift. And there's also no statistically significant difference by percentage of those who have actually left a gift to a nonprofit in their will. Other similarities are actually regarding use of the internet. So 1/3 of matures and boomers are actually going online to research charities that they're considering leaving a gift to. When we look at frequent donors, and those are donors who leave a gift to charity more than once a year, those donors and wealthier donors, and we're talking now about donors with net worth of more than $2 million, they're also using the internet to research charities that they're considering giving a gift to.
So what does this mean to our outreach? Hopefully some of you have followed some of the Pew Internet studies over the years, really since the late 90s. They've been following demographic information in regards to digital usage, digital adaption, and so forth. But what does this mean when we're looking at the planned giving space? It means a lot. It means not only just realizing that our folks are out there, that their advisors are out there, that they're doing due diligence before sometimes they have a conversation with us, but we need to be aware of how they're consuming that information as well. A lot has changed since the first planned giving websites really came to be back in the late 90s, 1998, 1999. And now it's really more about the user experience, or the UX, and balancing more of the action focus versus the education. We know full and well there's not a lot of organic traffic to your website. People aren't waking up first thing in the morning saying, I wonder what's new at XYZ charity about planned giving. So how do we make sure when they get to that place that it's an experience that really resonates with them? So one thing, just sharing briefly with you, and I think some of you are hopefully already doing things like this, but when you're looking at your organization, and as you see on the screen, hopefully Southwestern University, when we get a captured audience when we're directing them, we need to make sure it's a experience that is specific and actionable and trackable. So as opposed to years ago when they came to our site and they'd be pulled different ways to read information about the athletics team or around some other things, making sure, and athletics I think actually have led the charge in this, especially in higher ed, where you go to their page on their website and the branding is consistent, obviously the look and feel of the organizations, but you're not distracted by all the other things. And you'll see that with this here. It's an all-encompassed kind of organic feel, and making it very simple for them to identify where they want to go, for those that have an idea of what they're looking for, and for those that don't, very quickly find information. Kind of a less is more approach. One thing to note is being mindful when you're working with your marketing or communications teams, that whenever we look at all the traffic from our client sites, 75% of those folks are coming in through a tablet. And so being able to consume this information outside of our traditional PCs or laptops is something critical for us to all keep in mind, not only when it comes to print, but to email as well. And being mindful too, one thing as we look at websites and how people are using them is how to take that next step. Years ago, and I think some of you on the call have heard me share the story about the great talk Jeff Comfort gave out at the, I guess we were NCPG at that time, National Conference in Denver. But it was really around losing a seat at the table, how at that point, more and more donors were going to their advisors first than coming to us. And we can't make assumptions that just because we send an email to them, we send them to our website, or we send a print piece, what have you, that they're taking action in that manner and doing, replying to us through that same medium. So make sure it's crystal clear, as you see here at this example on the right side, that for any generation, but specifically our audiences that we're talking about today, make it very easy for them to take next steps. Make it very easy for them to take this information, act on it, and or connect with us if appropriate. The next thing we want to look at as far as generational similarities really comes down to the reasons, the why people are looking at to support us in a planned gift capacity. For years and years and years, if you look back at how marketing and communication around planned giving had grown, there was a lot of old marketing publications that honestly look like Kiplinger's tax newsletters. They're very vehicle focused. They're very tax focused. And while no doubt those tools are a crucial part of the how people give, it's not the reason why. And so not only in the studies that we've been investing in, but in other studies that have come out throughout the industry, this is consistently the number one reason why people give, and it's because it makes them feel good to help other people. And while it's similar, both matures and boomers, that they give for this reason, it's by a factor of really 5 to 1 over the other generation. So we need to make sure when you are thinking about how do you strike a chord with regards to that emotional support, how do you do that? And so we'll share a couple examples here on really the act of storytelling and triggering that emotion. I think if you've been to any of the conferences, whether regionally or nationally, or followed other webinar series, there's a lot more information in our space around the art and the act of storytelling between Penelope Burke, John Trivas from Georgetown, and others. It is so critical for us to be able to connect the dots for folks on the impact that these dollars have. And the nature of us as plan giving professionals and the gifts of which we are asking folks to make, they aren't going to be around to see the good work the dollars do. So how can we tie emotion to this with regards to some of these stories? Here's an example, hopefully you're seeing on your screen, with UNICEF. UNICEF no doubt helps tens and thousands of children around the world, but it's very hard for one single donor to get their head around, how does my gift impact so many people? So thinking of the focus and keeping it very singular in nature, as opposed to multiple pictures. So you see here a picture of a student and a story around how a gift can support them. Again, thinking about today's day and age, trying to be more visual and blocking out some of that content to tell those stories. So you see a couple different stories in this particular example. Again, and some calls to action on how you too can help kids like them live their dreams and get out of the poverty and so forth.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. Let's look at a couple of other similarities. Both of these generations are absolutely terrified of running out of money in retirement. And because of that, we're seeing that 76% of matures and almost 9 out of 10 boomers are leaving gifts to 3 or fewer charities. So I'm sure all of you that are out there listening know how much more competitive the plan giving space has become. And as Nathan said, this is something that we've been tracking now for a long period of time. And we've seen these numbers shrink year after year. If we were having this discussion even 5 years ago, those numbers would have been 4 or 5 charities. 10 years ago, it might have been 6 or more. And we're also seeing that both of these generations, less than a quarter of them, really are talking to financial advisors before making gift decisions. So they're not particularly, educated when it comes to knowing what types of gifts might actually help them, retain more of their income and still allow them to meet those needs that they, those philanthropic, desires or needs that they have. So, other similarities, we also know that nearly 7 out of 10 donors prefer to give to local organizations over national or global nonprofits. And this is a proprietary question that we have been embedding into our research now for 4 years. And we see these numbers stay static across actually all generations and over another 50 or plus different points that we look at. And the reason for that, again, is they want their gifts to be impactful, and they want to be able to see how those dollars are being used.
So how do we do that? How do we, with generations, as I mentioned earlier, the mature generation growing up in the Depression area and really trusting and seeing firsthand how big charity supported folks through those trying times? How do we use personalization variable data to better articulate to the boomer generation as they come in, who, as Cheryl noted, may be a little more suspect, maybe questioning things, maybe wanting to see more and more of where some of those dollars go and the impact that they make. And we've seen this localization focus really take off, and probably you see that in your own neighborhoods as well, as far as buying local, growing local, shopping local, and it actually does spill over into philanthropy as well. And thankfully, in today's day and age, it's a lot easier to be able to do some of these things and really drive that motion. If you want to go to the next slide really quick, show an example here. You may be thinking, all right, this is great. I'm a national charity or an international charity. How do I take advantage of really personalizing or localizing my message when we have such reach and such impact across the entire United States? Here's an example of something that Feeding America has done. Obviously, a terrific organization, supports food banks throughout the country, but also raises money for Feeding America. Looking at some of these points on your screen there in pink were opportunities for them using verbal data to really personalize and tailor it to folks in their community. So instead of sending a blanket, as we typically refer the spray and pray approach, looking at really for those of you in the state of Iowa, these are the number of food insecure people that we have helped and supported. This is the impact that we are having in your backyard, making it much more tangible, much more easy to understand where those dollars are going. There's another example with American Friends Service Committee. Again, utilizing a couple different cover letters here, a couple different letters to not only drive personalization for stewardship, but also for our prospective donors. Many of us have tried probably with life income gifts, in particular CGAs, using some of this personalization. But here's an example, and you can see a little bit on your screen. There are some differentiations based on Mr. and Mrs. Donor to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. We have seen also, Cheryl just pointed out, or a circle there, putting a pre-populated reply card. Both Direct Marketing Association as well as other firms have seen an uptick in regards to using that. In fact, 22% increase in response using pre-populated reply cards. So if you have the ability when you are putting together your marketing outreach and working with your teams internally to pre-populate that, making it as easy as possible for those generations to connect with you is always a good idea.
Okay, well, now that we have gone through a number of generational similarities, let's take a look at some plan giving differences. When we first started putting this presentation together, I was kind of laughing with Nathan. It sort of reminded me of first year Spanish class where you feel like you're getting it down and you're memorizing verbs. And then for every regular verb, all of a sudden there were 6 that were irregular, and that's kind of what we're running into when we start looking at specific differences between boomers and matures. So we're going to look at a couple of different things here. We're going to look at differences between boomers and matures as a generation, but we're also going to start splitting boomers into a couple of different groups. Let's look at early boomers, and those are our boomers who were born between 1946 and 1954. And then you're going to also hear Nathan and I talk about late boomers, and those are boomers who were born between 1955 and 1964. So there are some sector preferences. Boomers are more likely than matures to leave a future gift to healthcare, human services, and medical research nonprofits. And that we know that out of the 10 or 11 largest nonprofit categories, these 3 are the largest. We also know that late boomers are, again, those are our boomers that were born between 55 and 64. They're actually more likely to leave a future gift than an early boomer, again, 46 to 54, to healthcare and international affairs nonprofits. Digging a little bit differently into sector differences, we wanted to really kind of take a look to see, are there any big differences when we're looking at opportunities to make restricted or unrestricted gifts. We know that, based on our research, that boomers are nearly 5 times more likely than matures to make a restricted gift to medical research nonprofits, for example. And boomers are 10 times more likely than matures to make a restricted gift to healthcare and human services organizations. We started touching on this a few minutes ago, but financial concerns in particular are really plaguing boomers. You see here on the screen that 1/3 of matures say that they're very satisfied with their current savings and investments, but 19%, so less than 1 in 5 boomers, are very satisfied with their savings and investments. And because of this, boomers, much more so than matures, are absolutely terrified that they are going to outlive their retirement savings. And if you've heard either Nathan or myself speak in the past, the number one reason for this actually comes down to fear of cognitive decline and what the costs, the long-term health care costs of either themselves, someone that they love, dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's or other issues of cognitive decline. So right now, only 22% of early boomers are saying that they're very satisfied with having enough money to retire. And only 13% of late boomers also think that they're going to financially be able to retire with the type of living experience that they're used to. And less than half of boomers actually believe that they're going to have enough money to meet their financial obligations after retirement.
Thanks, Cheryl. And this really ties to, as we're getting some great questions coming in here soon from Joe that made the statement, many boomers are ill prepared for retirement, thus gift giving seems to diminish. It's true. This is a thing both in regards to the comfort as far as will they have enough money based on how individuals are living longer, based on health concerns, and based on this is really the boomer generation, the first generation that has adult children living at home as well as their parents sometimes. So it is a generation that's having to address a variety of different things. So giving them financial peace of mind as it relates to gift planning is very critical. And this is also a generation, as both Cheryl and I stated earlier, that is typically, will question things anyway. And so how do we give them ideas on how they can continue to support the organizations that are near and dear to them, but also make sure that they're not putting themselves in a place of concern for retirement. So here are some examples. Again, thinking about really giving donors the information in regards to keeping control of their gifts. So typically, we saw this a lot after the downturn in 2009, talking more and more about percentage designations as opposed to dollar designations, because if a third of your portfolio drops, it's a lot more easy for the donor to tolerate a percentage shift as opposed to a dollar shift. But also looking at gifts that provide for individuals, in this example for children, but also give them control over those gifts. Looking at life income options too, and real estate options. What are ways to help people while retaining your real estate? And the final example here again is in regards to receiving income for life, trying to things that we're hopefully doing already and driving messages home, wherein they can also support the organization that's near and dear to them, that extension of their family in our nonprofit, but be able to be assured that they're going to have some income and have some resources for their retirement planning. We'll skip to the next one very quickly there. And so looking at the motivations around boomers in particular, and what are the things that are driving them, really the number one motivator is, as I mentioned, understanding how that gift can make an impact. And as you see here, really 8% of maturers answer the statement, I am always looking for new opportunities to create change for the better. And as Cheryl mentioned, looking at early and or late boomers, 17 and 26% are looking at where can I make a better impact? Where can I drive some change in my philanthropy and in my world? And so how dollars are used, and plan giving dollars in particular, is very critical. And in a day and age where we are inundated with more and more marketing messages, and again, the average consumer now sees about 5,000 marketing messages a day. Back in 1972, when Robert Sharp Sr. coined the phrase plan giving, the average consumer saw 500. There's a lot more focus and attention taken away from our donors, and we need to be mindful. So visuals are a great way to connect the dots and try to articulate in as quick a manner that we are being good stewards, that dollars are going where they're intended to go. Here's a couple examples of this is Trust for Public Land using an infographic, talking about, again, in this specific situation, since 1972, this is what we've done. This is the impact that we've had, and then being able to make the case for that work going forward. Here's an example of YMCA being a hero. These are the things that we are able to accomplish because of the support that you're able to give us. Again, this is things that they've been sharing for years, but typically it's lost sometimes in an article or sometimes in content, and being able to draw it out in a more visual way is a great way to address boomers. And then finally, looking at a timeline of sorts. This is actually Truman State looking at a timeline in regards to through the years and the impact that fundraising has had at that school and how it has helped make the institution what it is today. So these are just a couple simple examples. Hopefully you're already incorporating some of these types of things to really, especially for the boomer audience and even younger generations, to be able to quickly articulate the impact that you're having, because as we know, again, playing gifts, the nature of the gifts, people aren't going to be around to see the good work the dollars do. So if we can show the impact they're having now, it helps everybody.
Okay, before we get into messaging and looking at who's got what, I think it's important to kind of go back to the basics. And one of the things that we asked in our research is just simply, how important do you think it is to have a will? And you can see here that there are some very key differences when we look at not only between our matures and our boomers, but also some very significant differences when we're looking at early and late boomers. So I guess our takeaway here is don't forget the basics, that for a good portion of that boomer audience, you're going to not only have to talk about different gift types and try to ease their peace of mind when it comes to actually giving, but you're going to have to give them a reason to really create a will. So let's look at again, who's got what. So 76% of our matures actually already have a will, 59% of our early boomers, and only 41% of our late boomers. So Nathan was talking earlier about, segmenting communications, and here's a very clear example of why it wouldn't make a lot of sense to be sending something to a mature audience on how to get started with will planning when 76%, and that's probably a very large portion of those that have the financial means to give already have a will. It also makes maybe some good sense for your organization to take a look at how different 41% and 59% is from a message standpoint when we're dealing with those two boomer audiences as well.
So real quick, we'll take a step away from the research as Cheryl kind of shows who's got what, and look at this by the generations. So when you're thinking of being able to segment, and I'm a fan of segmenting, but not for the sake of segmenting. So, but when you do have audiences where there are crystal clear differences, as we do here with boomers and with matures, there's real opportunity for us to utilize even calls to action differently. Typically, when people are doing marketing in this space, there's the broad brush guide to a better will or guide to a gift annuity. But we're seeing certain things resonate with all these audiences better. So on the left here, you see something we probably all have some variation of in our office, some type of, this is an estate planning record book, wills kits, estate planning checklists, things like that, that really are more of a service before solicitation approach of giving the boomers in particular, those who really only 41 to 59% have a will, giving them tools on if you've done something already, here's things to be aware of. If you haven't, here's a good place to start. So providing some of those tools is a great way to do that. On the right, you see what to do in the first 48 hours when a loved one passes away. So when we're thinking about that mature audience, 76% already having a plan in place, it's about thinking about other ways to get them engaged. What are planning things that impact them or may impact them as they're looking at it? And how easy is it? When you have to make some of these tough decisions in life, how easy is it to make some of those changes and be able to still fulfill your philanthropic intent?
Thanks, Nathan. Beyond age, one of the things too that we're taking a hard look at, and you may want to do this as well, is we also know that women are much less likely than men to actually have a will, yet they are the ones that are driving the conversation. And we see this particularly because we know that by far the majority of planned gifts that are coming from married couples. So that's something else, not only looking at age, but also maybe doing some further segmentation and looking at those who are married couples, and also considering doing some things specifically to get women more engaged in estate planning. So moving on into looking at other gift types and who's got what, we saw we had a 26-point difference when we were looking at the difference between the boomers and matures when it came to having a will. You see these numbers start to tighten up when we're looking at IRAs and 401ks. And again, remember that IRAs did not come into existence until 1974. So I think there's a really good reason for this. Again, we do see, though, that this is a statistically significant difference when we're looking at matures and boomers. So now let's look at joint ownership of property. Again, we see a fairly significant difference between early boomers, late boomers, and matures. And this goes back to when Nathan first started our conversation today, looking at the values of matures and boomers. For matures, owning their own home and also then putting their children's education at the top of the line was very top of mind for this audience. And so that joint ownership of property is something that we see at a significantly higher level. Moving on to living trusts. Again, we see a 10-point difference here between our boomers and our mature audience, and a much smaller gap now between early and late boomers. And let's look at TODs now. Same thing here. Our matures at 32%, much more likely to have this type of estate planning document than either of our boomer groups. And you can see that we only have a 1% difference here between our early boomers and our late boomers. And then finally, let's look at that group who absolutely has nothing. And this is kind of frightening as a boomer. I can tell you myself that we have 25% of early boomers, and these early boomers are now well into retirement age that have absolutely nothing. And 32%, or 1 in 3 of these late boomers who, again, these are individuals born between 1955 and 1964 that have absolutely nothing. But yet only 5% of matures. So again, just from a playing the odds perspective, that being able to reach someone who can benefit from your guidance and looking at various plan giving opportunity, there's a much larger opportunity, not only by size of generation, but just who really is looking to maybe do some estate planning.
Thanks, Cheryl. I mean, this is really great information to have to see kind of where across the different generations some of these assets or these planning tools are living. But how do we find out? How do we really identify when we're having donor cultivation conversations, whether that's through our marketing or that's through one-on-one or face-to-face? And one of the things that we found, I think a lot of other folks have started to see, is providing donors or prospective donors even that outlet to let you know. And in today's day and age, we're seeing so much information shared via surveys and so much information gleaned via surveys. So looking at how can we get people to engage? And you see just in the nature of everything we touch and feel today with TripAdvisor, Yelp, everybody providing feedback, good, better, and different. Our donors are no different. And I think even Dr. James has done some nice research in this space and in regards to how do we position and how do we get people to share with us what they're doing. And so looking at, again, how where appropriate and which audience you have, how can we get them to engage with us and share that information in a timely manner?
We also know that interest in most gift types actually differs. In this case, boomers are 5 times more interested in CGAs than matures. We also know that boomers are 3 times more interested in CRTs than matures. But when it comes to really looking at some major differences within the boomer groups, we see that our late boomers, and this was kind of a surprise, you would think that maybe the early boomers, those who are closer to retirement would have really shown up on the higher end on this, but in this case, our late boomers are nearly twice as interested than early boomers in tax benefits from donating homes or other property. And we also see that they're nearly twice as interested than early boomers in saving capital gains by giving stocks or bonds. And it may be, again, that when we had the technological boom back a few decades ago, that these early boomers, may have capitalized on that, the late boomers may have capitalized on that to a better extent than our early boomers. There is a huge exception here, though, and that has to do with honor and tribute. And again, this is something that we've been tracking now for a number of years, and we do see that both matures and boomers are more than twice as interested in making an honor or tribute gift than any other gift type. And this is something that you're going to see Stelter talk much more about this coming up in the next few months. For those of you that have always thought of honor and tribute as more of an annual gift type, you're going to see, not only based on our research, but extensive research done by Russell James down at Texas Tech, that when we take honor and tribute gifts out of that laundry list of ways to give, and we make it more of an attribution on any other gift type, we're seeing not only are more planned gifts being given, up to 25% more, but that those gifts also are larger. Excuse me.
And so some of you who have probably heard me speak over the last couple of weeks, I know I've been out to some regional conferences, I've shared this story a couple different times, and there's a lot of different examples of ways that people are taking the concept of honor and tribute. Again, as Cheryl mentioned, we've seen this in our research come up. Dr. James has seen this in his as well. Here's just one example from a couple of years ago, which I thought really drove home the opportunity that sometimes can present itself at our different institutions. And this is the great folks out of the San Francisco Symphony, and an opportunity they had with their longtime musical director, Michael Tilson Thomas, turning 70. He had been there for so many years and really made the organization what it is, and very loved and revered by the constituents. They took the opportunity in an organization that receives some nice intentions year in, year out, but nowhere near where they want it to be. They took the opportunity to make, as we all look at, as we get to the end of the year and look towards next year and make our SMART goals and objectives, they made planned giving and the intent or opportunity to inform us of their plans a SMART objective, made sure it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And so they did this over the year of his 70th birthday. These are just a couple examples of how they created a campaign around the idea of paying tribute to him for the impact that he's had on the organization, and do a 70 at 70 campaign. And this was an absolutely terrific way, not only to get folks that have already made intentions but haven't had a reason to tell them about it, but also get people to come out of the woodwork that were maybe looking or had the intent of sitting down and doing something and finally execute. And so again, this was an opportunity to identify 70 gift intentions. They ultimately ended up identifying 82. And so think about this with your own institution. Are there opportunities that are coming up with the beloved faculty member, coach, president, headmaster that is retiring? Is there an anniversary that makes sense to tie in? It's not something you can do all the time, but looking for those unique opportunities to really be able to maximize this and create some interest with your donor file.
So now that we've got matures and boomers down, what's next? Don't forget about Generation X. This generation is going to inherit the bulk of the wealth from their boomer parents. So it's also time to start thinking about getting ready for them. They're going to make larger gifts than previous generations. And again, it comes down to, what's it going to take for my gift to make an impact? And this generation believes that it's going to take more than what their boomer parents are giving in order to make the type of impact that they want to make with the organizations that they're supporting. And finally, this is a generation that's more likely than matures or boomers by a very significant margin to give online. So with that, we're going to turn it back over to Jen and questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Cheryl and Nathan. We do have some questions that came in through the presentation that we'll get to. I'm just going to start with a real simple one, Cheryl, just to give some framework again for Robert. He was asking if you could define the matures age group again.
That's the group that was born between 1925 and 1945. For our purposes, we call them matures. It's how they track it in the National Research Tree. Others, you may be more familiar with them as the silent generation.
Okay, and then towards the end of the presentation, you showed the graphs on those that have beneficiary designations, joint ownership of property, etc. And Lauren was asking, are those percentages pertaining to the people who have those things or who have those things and have made gifts using those things?
Those numbers refer to individuals who actually have those things. It doesn't mean that they've made a gift using them. Good question.
Thank you. And then you talked a lot about the preference for people to give locally. And so I can find it. I lost track of it now. We had a question that came in that said, if you're going to, promote local, does that mean that you need to restrict the gifts that come in based off that campaign to the local area? Do you have thoughts about that, Nathan?
Yeah, great question. Again, not necessarily restrict, but opening up the conversation to let people know that they can hit an impact. I think that's one of the things, obviously unrestricted, we prefer so we can use it as the mission and the organization needs. But really, we've seen this even in the simplest of things of putting something or a last sentence in a reply mechanism, a reply card, inviting them to have a conversation on where they'd like to see their dollars have an impact. And really not saying, yes, we want to restrict it to X, Y, Z, but allowing them to really have more ownership because so many donors think of their giving anymore as investments, allowing the opportunity really for that conversation. Good question.
I have a question from Angela who's saying that she has a great deal of her donor matures and boomers that are interested in protecting their grandchildren, and so it's a tough conversation. She's wondering if you have thoughts about how you might approach that situation.
I think a lot of that's going to come down to what the individual goals are for the grandparent with their child. How much of that gift that they're considering making is actually going to support the goals of the family, the goals of what those grandkids want to accomplish, and how much of that also might be also used to support other charitable organizations. So I think it's a good question. It's an excellent question actually, but I think it's going to come down on a case-by-case basis.
And I'll interject a little bit on that as well because I think it's something from a messaging standpoint when you are having those conversations with matures and boomers or some of those folks who are looking at the future generations to come is making it very crystal clear we're not asking for 100% of their estate. We saw this and we actually researched this in our 2012 study and we asked around the idea of inheritance, whether you want to leave, you believe you're going to be leaving an inheritance or you believe you're going to be receiving it. And we asked at that time, would it be okay if 5% went to charity? And across the board, I think it was about 87% said, yes, that is fine. And so I think it's really talking about that in a percentage designation and really driving home. A lot of this, I think, anymore is us just being straightforward and not beating around the bush about some of those objections we know are simmering under the surface. In fact, I know there was a grassroots effort out in the Northwest, I believe in the Seattle area, about a campaign called Leave 10, just asking that leave 10% to charity. And so I think that's a good way, again, to have those conversations where it is critical to plan for future generations of your family, but also be able to take care of the charities that are near and dear to you.
I have a question from Jenny. She was asking if you know the percentage of each of these groups that has included a nonprofit in their will.
I'll take this one, Jen. I will tell you, Jenny, I know you think you've asked a really simple question, and the answer is it varies by sector. We actually track 11 different nonprofit types, and it ranges anywhere from 1% to 5%. But there are also some other factors that come into play here. A lot of it has to do with household income and net worth. And so if you want to, I know at the end of the presentation, there's some information on how you can get in touch with us. If you've got some specific questions that you've got regarding your particular sector, please feel free to shoot those to us, and I'd be happy to respond and give you some more specific information.
Thanks, Cheryl. We have a question from Mary Beth. She's asking, do you find that matures and boomers and Gen Xers alike like to be recognized, or would they prefer that they can be anonymous in their guests? And also, second part of that question, do they identify with being as part of a named legacy group?
A good question, Mary Beth. And in fact, actually, we had included this in one of our research projects a couple of years back around the impact of a recognition society, legacy society, heritage club, what have you. And we asked very specifically, is that the main motivator for you to self-identify? And across the board, 99% of folks said, no, this is not the reason why I choose to make it known of my intention. And so at that time, I remember some conversation and some bloggers and some different consultants talking about, well, do we need to go away from societies? I don't believe so. I believe they're a tool more than anything else, an opportunity to recognize, to steward, to thank folks in perpetuity. And so, yes, I would continue doing those. No, I don't think it's the lead reason. And in regards to whether it be matures, boomers, Gen X, whoever that may be, on their ability or their willingness to come forward, I mean, we know through every single research project that's been out there, you know, that about a third of the population will ever self-identify. And that leaving the full 2/3 of the population that will find out about their gift when we find out. And when we ask why that is, it usually comes down. The top two reasons are always, it's my personal business. What if they'll find out when they find out? And the second one being, what if something changes in my health or my financial situation? I've told XYZ charity. So it's going to continue to be a challenge to get people to come forward during their lifetime. And that's why I think looking at some of the marketing, as we looked at the campaigns around 70 at 70 and things like that, are great ways to be creative in thinking about getting people to come forward.
Thanks, Nate. We're down to our last minute. We'll just do one quick question to end the session. Paul wants to know, if you have data, what does it say about childless, boomers, or matures? Sure.
Actually, Paul, we do have all of that data. And I will tell you, you might be surprised to know that, again, tracking this across 11 different nonprofit sectors, the proportion of those with children actually is growing. And I would say in each instance, the proportion of donors that have children exceeds those that do not. Again, if you have a specific question regarding your sector, would be happy to answer any questions that you have regarding that and give you the splits in those numbers. So we do have that information, and I can dig pretty deeply into that for you.
And that is a great segue, Cheryl, as we wrap this up. If you do have additional questions about anything that was presented here, or perhaps your question didn't get answered here at the end, we had a lot come in, feel free to reach out to us individually. You can reach out to Cheryl. She knows all of the data. You can reach out to Nathan about any marketing tips. If you have questions about the webinar that was presented today, you can reach out to me. If you have questions about our products or services, Stella, or you can visit our website. So there's all your email addresses that you can copy down and reach out to us if you have any additional questions. And then finally, the main question I get is, can we get the slides and the handouts? And can we access the recording? And the answer is absolutely. Barring any technical difficulties, we recorded the webinar, and we will have it along with the slides on our website at stelter.com/webinars within the next couple days. Definitely by Monday, you can check that out. You will get an email from me once they're live. So if you just want to wait for that, you'll get the email, and you can go and get those slides and watch the recording. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to both Nathan and Cheryl, and we had about 300 of you on the line today. Thank you for joining us, spending the last hour with us over perhaps your lunch hour. We always enjoy the participation in these webinars, and we hope that you visit our website and sign up for the webinar in December with Greg Sharkey. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.